All right, next on the docket, the Akai Gurley case. The officer charged with manslaughter for shooting Gurley in a Brooklyn stairwell, he is on trial right now. The facts in the case really aren't in dispute so much. Both sides agree that Officer Liang was on patrol when he fired his gun down an unlit stairwell in 2014, killing Akai Gurley. Gurley, by the way, just happened to open a door to a stairwell. Now, the prosecution says the officer was reckless, violated his training when he pulled his gun and fired for no apparent reason. It also says he didn't call for help right away because he was only worried about himself. Now, the defense says this a very dangerous housing complex, unlit stairwell, and Liang accidentally discharged his weapon, so it was just a terrible mistake, and he has pleaded not guilty. And this has a lot of layers to it, Mayo, one of which was the DA in the case said, no, I don't need a special prosecutor. I'm going for an indictment. In a perverse way, couldn't you argue here, if you're defending the officer, just like the families of victims of violence, victims of shootings of police may have said, you had a DA who never even intended to get an indictment out of a grand jury and never presented a case to try and get one. Conversely, couldn't you say if you're Officer Liang, wait a minute, I got a DA who didn't even look at the facts and the evidence of the case. He was shooting for an indictment before even I had a chance. Is there a chance that this time we could be looking for the first time at the other side of this?
Well, that begs the question in the criminal justice system across the board, whether there's enough investigation before people are charged. And quite often when it's someone who's not in a uniform, that person gets charged, there's some investigation most of the time. Sometimes it's just a word of one person who says you did something, and then later you learn that that never occurred. When it happens to the 99.9% of the people who are not law enforcement, we move ahead, and in fact the jury tends to think that person must have done something or they wouldn't have been arrested. I think we really have to look at the entire way that we accuse people. There should be more transparency, and I believe there needs to be criminal justice reform in terms of the way the grand jury is set up across the board to afford all defendants access to the grand jury. And it shouldn't even be housed in the same building or certainly the same floor as the district attorney's office. It ought to be equal access for prosecution and defense.
And in this particular case, this was right around the time when the Attorney General in New York got more powers in this case, and he could basically take it upon his office instead of the local DA. However, it is in the DA's hands in Brooklyn, and they did get an indictment, and the trial is beginning. Okay, so help me out, because in the last year or so, Jimmy, we've seen a lot of cases where, whether it's the Tamir Rice case in Ohio, and I can go up and down the line, you say, wait a minute, this is crazy. That kid shouldn't be dead today, or that guy was unarmed. Why is he dead? Why didn't the cop get charged? And the threshold if they felt a perceivable threat, right, is basically all you need. In this case, they put two rookie cops together, which everybody agrees they shouldn't have done. They put them in a tough housing project in a stairwell that didn't have any lighting. We know police training and protocol says you don't take your gun out to go up the thing. You only basically unholster your gun when there's a perceivable threat. There wasn't at the time. Nobody says Gurley did anything wrong. All he did was open up a door in the building that he happened to live in. Then the gunfire rang out and killed him. Accidentally discharged or not. After the shooting, it gets, maybe the officer didn't do the right thing and called 911 right away. He might have called his union rep. But that's not right away what he's charged with. He's charged with manslaughter. So where is the line for an officer making, in effect, a mistake without malice or intent, and it's still being a crime?
Well, there's intentional crimes, and then there's negligent crimes, and there's reckless crimes. And so what elevates something from a mistake or a civil accident, so to speak, is if it's criminal negligence or recklessness, it is the degree to which you ignore a risk. And reckless is when you ignore a substantial risk that death will occur, so you're aware of it and you disregard it. Negligence is when there is a risk and you disregard it, irrespective of whether you know it or not. And it seems to me that this is more a criminally negligent situation
he's got that
than a reckless situation. Right. So I think that that's going to be the question for the jury. And you know, look, we all know that your conduct after an event sometimes speaks to what your state of mind is during the event.
Is there a line, though, Jimmy, when you try and figure out the guilt or innocence of a person, what happened before the gun was fired and what happened after? Because the person's dead because the gun went off. You can argue, yes, and more media treatment may have mitigated, you know, whether the person lived or died. They are, but there isn't a bright line between. It's all part of one event.
It is all part of one event, and I mean, look, the conduct before the shooting and at the time of the shooting, you're right, is not in dispute. This kid pressed an elevator button. The elevator didn't come because it never comes, so he decided to take the stairs. All he did was open the door to go down the stairs. Now, I understand that they're rookies, and we've talked about how we need training here and how really that's, in some ways, the root of the problem. But it seems to me that, I don't know, a flashlight, you can unholster your gun, they're patrolling. You know, there were other ways to deal with this. So to be honest with you, it does certainly smack of negligent behavior. And then afterwards, to be fighting with his partner about who was going to call it in because he was afraid to get fired and not going immediately and administering CPR.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
And
he didn't call an ambulance.
Those are tough facts.
And a lot of this also makes you look at who our candidates are that get on the job.
And I feel
when
bad.
you look at people who are afraid, and that's a common theme in all of these cases, whether it's the 12-year-old kid getting shot or Eleanor Bumpers getting shot who can barely move. Everyone claims to be afraid. If you're that scared, perhaps you shouldn't be a police officer, because Akai Gurley had to go up and down those steps, and he didn't have a gun.
But because there's still people, Mayo, does the tie always go to the cop?
It should not. You ought to be able to look at each case on a case-by-case basis. You shouldn't automatically go against the police, but you certainly shouldn't automatically give them the tie. And you ought to look at, what did this person do? Was it reasonable? Down to, hey, if you had called for 911 for assistance and maybe tried CPR first, perhaps we wouldn't be dealing with a homicide case in the first place. So all of these things have to be fair game for the trier of fact to consider.
But you know, Rich, when you're looking at a case like this, just because a person, even if a person gets acquitted in the criminal case, it doesn't mean it's not a really good civil case. And when you're
no, you guys have said that to me a lot.
Yeah.
But the public doesn't look at it that way.
Well, you have to look at it that way, because when you're looking at especially the conduct of police officers, most police officers are not going out on their job that night to kill somebody. Usually something horrible went wrong under these facts. And something that goes wrong could be completely civil, but it could still be horrible. But now we're evaluating in a criminal context, and that's a completely different evaluation.
Yeah, but he's charged with a raft of different things. And to me, the most damning, and again, I don't know the facts, but the most damning part of this is that there's a civilian on the phone with 911 getting instructions from the 911 dispatcher on what to do and how to tend for this person, and yelling at the cop to give CPR, to call an ambulance. And according to the eyewitness testimony, instead of doing that, he walked around the body, not only failed to administer the CPR, doesn't call an ambulance because he's scared for his job. And I understand that in the heat of the moment, you could have that fear. It's understandable from a human level. But if this person gets hung criminally, it's going to be because of what happened after, because both because of what he actually failed to do in the aftermath and what it says about his state of mind leading up to it during the actual shooting.
I want to save some time for this next subject. Nice job on that one, guys. And that is a story that we all followed here, but the ending of the story, if you missed it, far, far different than what was the opening act. The filmmakers who made this gotcha video trying to get Planned Parenthood in trouble are now themselves the ones in trouble with the law. Stay with us.